for perfect. Welcome to our November meetup for Data for Good. We're very pleased you could join us with for the presentation with Mark on data considerations for grants. Before we get started, I'd like to go through a backgrounder of Data for Good for people who are new to our meetup. We'll just take a few minutes, and I'll be doing this with Vishnu. I'll take the first part and hand over to him for some of our volunteer opportunities. The very first thing we do, though, is a land acknowledgement. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge living on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika, the Kainai, and the Piikani First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, the Stoney Nakoda, which includes the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations, the Métis Nation, Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. Data for Good is a Canadian organization, and it's a group of people who are passionate and social-minded volunteers. We use our technical knowledge and skills to help make our community better through data. And what we like to do is work with organizations to help them better understand and use their data so they can have a better impact in the community through the use of their data. We have about 10,000 members across Canada. We have 9 chapters from Vancouver across to Halifax. We've helped over 100 nonprofits through over 200 events. Data for Good Calgary started in 2013, and to date, we've had over 3,000 people join us for our monthly meetups. And our meetups are every 4th Thursday, except for the summer and Christmas. And we use these as a way to meet people and share learnings and teach about data or about nonprofits, and preferably about the two together, which is where Mark's presentation today is going to be such a great fit. In addition to the monthly meetups, we have a number of volunteer opportunities we'd like to share with you. One of our flagship events is the Datathon. We usually have one Datathon a year where we work with an organization to get a set of their data, organize it to share it with you, the volunteers, and get a set of questions the organization would like to understand better. And then we turn you guys loose on the data for a weekend to see what you can get from the data to answer the organization's questions. The Datathon ends with a presentation to everybody at the Datathon, including the partner organization. And it's always a great event for learning and meeting people and discovering things through data. We have had a number of successful Datathons in Calgary, as you can see here on the left. And Jumpstart is the latest group we partnered with this year, and we'll be adding them to this slide shortly. And you can see on the right, a number of the other chapters have also participated, like with UNICEF, Greenpeace, Raising the Roof, you name it. In addition to those, in addition to our Datathons, we have partner projects and micro projects, and I'll let Vishnu speak to that.
Thanks, Corinne. So Data for Good has been actively engaged in impactful projects. So partner projects allows us to collaborate with various organizations to leverage data for positive change. So some of the organizations that we have collaborated with in the past were the Canadian Cultural Mosaic Foundation, the Alberta Law Foundation, and the PolicyWise Collaboration on Human Trafficking on an initiative sponsored by Not in My City. So with the Canadian Cultural Mosaic Foundation, we were able to enhance their data management process by developing an improved data entry system, and we created a dashboard to visualize race-based hate incidents reported through English media in Canada. So we also collaborated with Alberta Law Foundation Partnership to analyze data from legal aid clinics. So the goal was to streamline and optimize support services by gaining insights from that data. We also had a chance to collaborate with PolicyWise. So we focused on creating a dashboard to provide insights into the prevalence of human trafficking in data. And I had a chance to participate in this project. So that was a very impactful project that was sponsored by Not in My City. Additionally, we also run projects called micro projects, which is an event where we're offering volunteers a chance to contribute to short-term projects with social benefits. So these projects have a maximum duration of about 4 weeks. So we can either have it simple or ambitious, and we design it to make a positive impact by letting volunteers take the lead on how they want the project to be run. So we are currently having two micro projects, which involve the analysis of mentorship program feedback and a focused examination of refugees from specific regions around the world. So we want to find out if people from Ukraine have a certain uh, proclivity towards certain industries or not. So we're currently working with that with Jumpstart. So and looking ahead, we plan to issue a call for more micro projects early next year, and we are encouraging members to propose projects that align with their interests and expertise. Now I hand it over back to Corinne.
Thanks, Vishnu. Looking ahead, as I mentioned, there will not be a meetup in December due to the holidays, but in January, we will probably be celebrating our 10th anniversary of Data for Good. So please keep an eye out for the meetup or look for other sources of information. We have a Slack channel that we can post in our meetup, so you can see what we're doing via our Slack channel. I'd recommend that. And we're also in LinkedIn if you want to take a look there. So keep an eye out for January 25th, 2024. Put it in your calendars, and we hope you'll join us to celebrate. Now, I'm happy to introduce our main presentation, which is Data Considerations for Grants with Marc LePage. Marc is a CDMP certified data professional, and CDMP is the Certified Data Management Professional, which is a fairly new designation, which shows that you're good with data and passionate about data. He's been working for 12 years with BI, with business intelligence, with a specialty of reporting and data migration. He's also a board member of a local community association, and he's worked with a number of nonprofit associations. So I'll turn over the floor to Marc to tell us how we can better use data to better apply for and get grants.
Thanks, Corinne. Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming, and happy Fibonacci Day, by the way, if you didn't know. I'll start with the screen share. Yeah. So, as Corinne mentions, I've worked with data and nonprofits for a little bit. I have applied for grants as a not-for-profit board member. I've been both approved and rejected for grants, so I can't say it. I'm a shining example of making it work every time. I've also worked with companies to improve their data model so that they can give grants out to other people more efficiently. So it's pretty interesting taking a look at both sides of it. And what I'd love to chat about today is some basic considerations, both from the data side and from the grant side. So my assumption is that you probably have you're familiar with one side or the other, maybe a little bit of both. We're not going to dive too deep into, specific technologies or techniques. It's going to mainly stay high level. If you have questions, there's going to be some time at the end, but feel free to bring something up as you think of it. And if we really want to dive into a topic, feel free, everybody here, to steer the direction as you see fit. So to get started, funding, grants, we can also see this as, community relations, community investment. I'm assuming everybody here has some sort of exposure, either hearing about it, hearing about public grants, as a company, as an individual. Even private companies can get grants. So what are the benefits? So one question asked is, why would you want a grant if you get a donation? It's a big difference here. And one of the main reasons why granting is so important as opposed to receiving funds solely from donors is that it can allow for continued operations. If you get a multi-year grant, you can hire people. Sometimes your grants can also include resources. There's defined amounts, and a lot of the times, your entire event or your project, the success of it relies on it. When it comes to challenges, there's a lot more than what's shown here, but I'm trying to focus around a central subject or central item. And looking at it, I think time is probably the number one challenge, no matter how you define it. If you define it as time is in people resources, time is in, there's time sensitive activities, deadlines. Time is in working with dates and times, the most ambiguous data type that we can work with. It, however you want to define it, I think a lot of the challenges really revolve around time and timing. So let's say you actually want to get a grant if you haven't done this before. You just fill out a form, receive funds, and then you get it. You can spend it on whatever you want. A lot of us probably already know that's not true. There are a lot of strings attached, and it's not necessarily as simple as filling out a form. So if you haven't gone through this process before, we're just going to go through a few slides of a more detailed process. So before you actually fill out the form, you need to find the grant. Not every grant is available to the public. And if it is available to the public, sometimes it's not available all year. Other times you need to be invited. A company needs to actually send you a specific link or a specific process, and you're invited to take part in this. And we'll see the name partner showing up here. That's kind of an umbrella term of, the people and organizations and even public entities that we work with. For instance, I'm a board member of a local community association, which is a park. We weren't having a lot of events or activities at a park during COVID. So our local community liaison, who meets with us every month, actually helped us out for the City of Calgary's COVID relief program. And, I'm not sure we would have made time to figure that out by ourselves. So it was great to have, a partner in a City of Calgary employee work with us to be able to know about this funding and help us through some of the challenges along the way. Once we find it too, there's eligibility requirements, data, and again, partners. A lot of times, if you're going for a project, you're not necessarily going for funding alone. Sometimes you're reaching out to 2, 3 more people to collectively pool funds for project, event, or operations. And then once we have the information, we know we're eligible, then we can finally actually fill out the form. So when you fill it out, on the side, whether it's the public, private, a company, a team within the city or province, they evaluate it. Sometimes they evaluate with a score of 0 to 100. Sometimes it's just a yes or no. Other times it's just, everybody's a yes unless you're a no until the budget runs out. It can take many different forms. I found that when looking for funding from the private sector, the emphasis is more on impacts, and from the public sector, it's about compliance and eligibility. So did you do everything 100% properly? Is everything clear? Every application needs to be clear and understandable, but doing every step the right way is more focused for the public side, and emphasizing your impact seems to be more of a focus with private funding. And we'll notice that there's two arrows. What's that all about? Receive funds, spend funds. Well, some grants aren't giving you the funds so that you can spend them after. Some grants are actually just reimbursing you for money you already spent. For instance, drawing from my local community association, we're fixing the concrete around a skating rink that is degraded over the years. Applied for a grant with the province of Alberta, and they approved it. They are going to cover the costs. Once we pay for it, get quotes from vendors, have the concrete poured, they will reimburse us. So when we're applying for a grant, it's applying for reimbursement. So that can be troublesome too, because not every organization actually has the funds ready, or you are often, banking on getting funds so that you can hire that person or that contractor or start that initiative. So finally, let's say that's amazing. We found the form, filled it out, got the money or got reimbursed for the money. What happens after that? Well, there's a lot of work around budgeting. We need to look at the actual turnout and the results. Is it what we expected? Partners need to be thanked. This can be time consuming. I met Corinne at a data management association conference, and that conference had sponsors. The Data Management Association is a not-for-profit organization. And when people sponsor, definitely want to say a big thank you and put their company logo on. It took actually several hours of back and forth for one of the chapter's members to get the logo on our website properly. So, it's sometimes a large lift just to acknowledge and thank the people that are providing support. Say reconcile funding, well, there can be 2 or 3 different categories for an item spent, and you can be accountable to many different people. So let's categorize all those transactions, and does it make sense? And let's take another pass of what was spent and what the budget was. Also, of course, you're going to want to regroup with your team and then report the impact. You're going to want to say the impact for yourself, your company, investors, stakeholders. It's not uncommon to have to actually send a report like a one-pager and financial statements proving that you spent the money the way you said you were going to, in order to live up to your agreement when you receive the funds, as well as to be considered for future year grants. And not only, even though the money may hit your account, that doesn't mean it can't be clawed back either. So in some cases, if you don't perform your due diligence, you actually risk that funding that you have earned. I'm going to take a quick pause there because we just went through a lot of slides too, just to see if there are any immediate questions on that high-level grant process.
There's more to it than I expected, but so far, so good.
Thanks. Some are simple. There's micro grants, and sometimes those are what it does look like. Fill out the form, get the funds. There is definitely some reporting there, but depending on who you're asking for funding from, it can be quite involved. Let's take a look at the data side. So we want to work with data and grants. You're working with a not-for-profit organization. It's going to be pretty smooth, just like this picture. You got folders, futuristic things showing up on your screen. But the reality is usually quite a bit different. Sometimes there's not, we're not even at a point where 100% of activities have electronic forms yet. So you need to taper your expectations when looking at a project, when helping people when helping people get funding. Sometimes you're starting from complete scratch with your data model. So where are we going to get the data? Some open data available includes City of Calgary's community profiles, which has demographics for each community, like Dalhousie, Applewood, New Brighton, what have you. And it'll have counts on the dwellings, languages spoken, so on and so forth. It's pretty great. Alberta has the Open Alberta data sets too, and give you a lot of information on population demographics and other things that the province of Alberta tracks. Private, free, or paid data sets. So why would you pay for a data set when you're looking for potential grant or other fundings? Well, it depends. Sometimes you want contacts. I worked with a group in the education sector, and for their country's government, it was technically the positions and the buildings were public data, but who actually ran them was private. So they paid a substantial amount of money to actually be able to contact everybody without having to do the grind and figure out contacts from everybody's website. Sometimes it's research results. So, we want to support this campaign of getting kids to be more active because 100% of active kids do good things eventually, that type of scenario. Outside of what's already open or what you might pay for, I'd say most of the data actually comes from your team. Like you're creating the budgets, you're entering the data often manually, you're categorizing the data manually based on what for depending on what systems you have set up. And this is where we want to take a brief look at how we're entering data or how we're gathering it. And before looking at it through technical architecture, looking at it through the lens of data management principles. If you're not familiar with the Data Management Association, you've probably seen it on the wheel. Probably should have included a slide on this one. But we have a little snippet here, which are some of the data management principles. And one of the foundational things here is that you need to plan, you need to create and manage metadata data about data in order to be effective with your data. So when your transactions come in, your quotes from your vendors, when did these things happen? If we're talking about dates, what date was this? Is the date somebody was paid? Is this the date an event or a transaction occurred? And how are we actually keeping these records? Or how are we deciding who has access to these records? So some of the bit more basic questions to start with. And as we know, the data management isn't always a priority, but if we take the approach of saying there's no real difference between business requirements and data management requirements, like they're the same. We need to, in order to define what our business requirements are, we need to do this in a way where we can have data at the end of this or define data at the end of that activity. And some people who use data to show what they've done, and we've seen it in an earlier slide too, is create metrics and define what their impact was. This is a screenshot from Leftovers Foundation in Calgary. They're tracking how many millions of dollars they saved, how much CO2 is diverted, and how many pounds of food's redirected. So this is actually pretty clever because I imagine you can take free data to have an idea of how much weight the food is, and then I imagine you can figure out the CO2 from there. I'm not familiar with their exact calculation, but I have seen calculations like this before. People, factor in, 2.1 or 2.4 pounds is equal to a meal. How many meals did you give? That type of scenario. When we're looking at any grant, it'll usually involve people at some point. Not always. When you see there's a bunch of, cat calendars behind me. This cat picture in Corinne's background as well. So, sometimes an organization or charity could be focused around animals or the environment or something else. But I'd say 9 times out of 10, a form that I've come across or I've helped somebody with involves people. And it sounds like a very simple question. Well, how many people are you going to help? I don't know. How many people are in my area? Well, we can take a look at our population. We can take a look at an old census and give an estimate. But if you don't, depending on what you're asking for or where you are, you may want to think about it a little bit differently. Instead of number of actual humans in an area, are we talking about, can we say how many households we're going to help? How many dwellings are there in an area? And when we're looking at a data source, sometimes it doesn't include everybody. First off, if it's census, it only includes people who filled it out. And does it have exclusions? So if we're looking at multiple sources, especially, we want to be careful to look at what might be excluded. If we have, persons, is this coming from a labor statistics data source where only people who have like a T4 are included? And when we look at what categories are available, this is demographics for people. There are a lot of funding opportunities which include specific demographics: women, minorities, indigenous, other certain categories or demographics where you would want to say who you're serving or give more detail about who you're serving in order to be considered for funding. Again, probably the most ambiguous, the toughest data type to work with would be dates. Transaction date versus financial date. I think a lot of people have run into this before. We bought things on one day, but it didn't, based on our budgeting, based on how we do financial reporting, when did somebody cash the check? If we're still using physical checks or accept the payment. Do we need a time zone? This is YYC, Calgary data for good. Hopefully it's, a lot of times it's all going to be mountain time, but there's still always going to be that question. Do you actually need to capture the time zone? Most of the time it's going to be no, because a lot of the times you're not going to, if you're getting local funding and you're looking at your transactions, you're not going to have a bunch of transactions close to midnight that are going to spill over to another day. But it is a question to ask though, especially when you want to reconcile your budgets for the end of the year, because depending on how late a transaction or how your reporting works, a large payment potentially could make the difference of being in one budget year versus another. So when, we're tackling this as a team or helping an organization, that's a good question to ask. Is it possible for the time zone to make a difference of your budget reporting one year to the next? And we ask what year is being used, fiscal year versus calendar year. That could be a consideration. And not only fiscal year versus calendar year, but the fiscal year of the organization that's providing you the funding, or the fiscal year in which you receive the funding. Another example from a community association, when applying for those COVID grants, those were based on the calendar quarter, January, February, March, Q1. When looking at reporting for the province of Alberta, that was based on our fiscal year, which ends in April. When submitting an annual report for funding that we receive large amounts of funding from the AGLC, Alberta Gaming Liquor Commission. A lot of community associations, sports groups receive funding from the AGLC every 18 to 24 months, and their funding year ends in May or starts in May. So depending on who we're reporting to, a single transaction could have 3 different years. So when thinking about our model and thinking about, what date or what year these things are occurring in, sometimes it's not even just 1 or 2. It could be 3, 4, or even higher amounts. So it's great to, first off, please don't use strings. I think a lot of us who are practitioners already know when we look at our data cleaning or looking at our models, we look for a proper date data type to begin with. But as we saw on the earlier slide, that may not always be the case. So if nothing else, define what years are and make sure the date's actually a date. Currency, in Calgary, this probably isn't going to be as big of a thing depending on who we're helping out. If we're helping out somebody with a national or international presence, there may be some considerations here. In general, everything's Canadian dollars. If it's not, there's a lot of free currency conversions out there. I would just try to use something simple so that if you have to explain how you arrive to your number, you can do it in 10 seconds or so in plain English. If you're not familiar with in-kind contributions, I'm just saying sometimes you can give something or be gifted something that has value that is not money. Airlines give vouchers to certain corporations. Those can be considered in-kind gifts. If you were to donate a vehicle to Cars for Kids, you would get a receipt for the in-kind value of the vehicle. Those kind of things. So a lot of grant forms will say you can't raffle anything off. We don't, we're not considering in-kind. If you're asking for things that are not money, then they have to be very specific to this event. They're not just to be given away. So there's even more strings with in-kind things that are given to you than there are actual money in a lot of cases. But you may need to keep track of what the value is of the things that are coming in. Even if it's a rough estimate, as long as you have a clear description of what the item is and when you received it. Inflation isn't coming up as much, but I imagine in recent years it's probably on more people's minds. Like, we're looking for a budget for the next year. Are we, when we go to our regular contractors, they're increasing their prices. Are we actually going to plan for that in our next year's budget? So are you going to adjust your historical numbers when reporting, or adjust your future year's budget based on inflation? And talking about support, which is pretty much what we're all here to do, to help organizations in one way or the other. I sometimes on a pro bono project or reaching out to an organization, they're very excited to receive the help. I'm sure everybody's seen some version of this. This is kind of what people expect. We have data people now. We can do anything, and that's very flattering. But that's not the important part. The important part is getting people together and working towards a common goal. Yes, we all bring some expertise, could be, data science, AI, modeling, engineering, but they have our attention, and we're here to apply a bit of our expertise and our any business domain knowledge we may have to help their causes. So when looking at ongoing support, there's a lot of things we can do that get way more technical. But first, there's certain things that every application is going to need. You're probably going to need your business number, date of incorporation, proof of incorporation too. Sometimes you got to scan that document in and attach it to your form. Your names, contacts, socials, other important dates, when are you going to have your event? When are people available? Is it one day? Is it more than one day? Your current budget. And if you're usually a company will ask if you're getting money from anybody else. Like, is this the only source of funding that you're asking for your initiative? So if you're getting money from anywhere else and you're using it for that project or initiative, assuming it's not just for regular operations, keeping the lights on, then you'll have to disclose, or you want to be able to disclose quickly how that works. Who's helping you? How much are they putting in? And previous questions and answers. So when we look at these forms, a lot of the times your evaluation is based on question answer pairs. And a lot of the data you're going to need is just answering questions. How many people are you going to help? How many people in this demographic are you going to help? How many people are in your area? So one activity to help out would be just tracking the questions and answers to grant forms. And it doesn't necessarily even have to be the grant form that you've already applied to. It could be anything that you find online. And you can take that list of questions, the list, and the answers that and say, okay, well, what does this make sense? Maybe you create an entity relationship diagram from there, or a conceptual data model, and say, okay, well, we're getting a lot of questions about what geography we're serving. So we need to know the neighborhoods, like all the neighborhoods, or we need to understand where people are at, the postal code level, even maybe. Whatever your use case is, or whatever you're looking for support for, you will start to see patterns just intuitively after seeing dozens of questions come in, and they'll start to make sense as far as what are some of the core questions that you're going to need to answer time and time again. When looking at some ideas, well, one, I wish I had this. I'm working on it right now. It's an application calendar. So there's a Tool and Pete Action Grant for your community, and the deadline is November 12th, at least this year in 2023. It's open for a little bit, a fair amount of time. But if you're working with a team that has limited resources, it's pretty easy to miss an application deadline. Either you don't have time to fill out the grant, or you don't have the application window tracked anywhere. So one thing you can do is, well, figure out what grants are available, and then create an application calendar. Say, okay, well, when can we actually apply for these? Maybe you don't know all the answers right away, but as you apply, track when you applied to the grant, but also if you're right there on the website, have some sort of data entry mechanism to track the open and close date, if it's a recurring public forum, or when you are asked to give the information by, if it's a less formal or an invitation scenario. Okay, get sources from other people. We're just going to say it like that. Some of the sources we know because we already work with it, and in order to operate, especially in Calgary, in this area, and in your industry, you already know where to go for some pieces of information. But if you don't know, hopefully people like this network, YYC Data for Good, somebody from maybe the city or the province could help out, or other connections. So let's figure out who we can reach out to, or who has tackled this before. Because whatever funding you're going for, I'm willing to bet that somebody else has already gone through that process and already had to figure out what data to use and where to get it. And that brings me to the last idea on here, store Q&A. We touched on that before. When we say look for recipients, sometimes before actually applying or considering applying, I'll take a look at the recipients from a previous year's grant. So co-ops, refreshing, I don't know whether it's called refreshing spaces. Apologies, I don't have the name fresh in my mind, but co-op has an annual grant and they actually list the recipients out. And several community associations were a part of that in Calgary to help with things like community gardens. So you will look at the eligibility requirements when filling out the form, but also a lot of companies want to share their success in the community. As some people call it a social license to operate, but a lot of them actually list out the recipients. So yes, look at their eligibility, but take a look at who got the money too. And if they're an organization similar to yours, well, then maybe you should be able to get funding too. All right. I just want to thank everybody for taking their time and open it up for any questions or just chatting, discussion ideas.
Thank you for sharing your time, Mark. I forgot to mention at the beginning when I introduced you that I met you at the DAMA conference a month ago, and it's because of your presentation and you're talking about the grants process that I thought you'd be an excellent guest to invite to Data for Good, because this is something we haven't talked a lot about, is about getting money, but it's on a lot of people's minds. So I've taken away ideas of how I would like the kind of information I'd be looking for, and even things like looking at who else has won this and what can we learn by who they chose in the past, looking for patterns, or like you said, looking to see whether you even have a chance given the kinds of people they seem to be rewarding to. I haven't checked the chat.
Oh,
no.
Looks like we have 4.
I posted the DAMA wheel.
Thank you.
Because if people don't know DAMA or dama.org, it's a good source to know. And we have a couple of other posts like the Open Data Portal for City of Calgary and StatsCan. Also, their censuses are amazing and they have a very interesting website to look at. And the data they collect from the census, you can narrow down to Calgary or Calgary and vicinity. Unfortunately, they don't collect it on a community basis, so that makes it trickier to apply if you're trying to compare it to other data that Calgary collects, for example, per community. I was trying to crack that nut a few years ago, and I took a break. At some point, maybe I'll go back to that.
Well, I would, just like idea, shower thought even, I would look, I'm not sure if this group does it, but if we could create a Calgary data model that other groups could use, that would be an interesting datathon idea, perhaps. But taking a look at just some of the chat items. So I'm reading one about academic grants. Yeah, it does. It's the same and or different. The language could be different with academics. Sometimes they call them like proposals, not applications. So there might be a language difference. But yeah, so there is a process for the process for academic grants is usually more specialized, like group by group. Institution by institution, whereas there'll be like a global team for places like Walmart or Costco, and you can even check out like their community relations site, and they'll have guidance that they guide to other geographical areas. So I haven't personally worked for Costco or Walmart. I've seen their community pages, and I'm just making a few inferences from that. But yeah, so the bigger companies usually have more of a standardized process. Academics usually same with public sector usually has a bit more of a narrow process, but sometimes more help to get you through it. So for the recently registered to apply for grants, scan your proof of incorporation, please. Number one, if you don't have it, scan it, have it as a digital file. And I guess it depends on what you're looking to go for as far as, you know, looking to apply for grants and funding. If you recently registered for charities, you know, there's make sure you have your content and your other pages and whatever your criteria is out there. Start looking for some information and maybe even see if you can get nominated as a cause for companies like Benevity. So there's other companies that are in the corporate social responsibility space that uh, help uh, other companies donate their money and time. And there's certain groups that maybe you can register as a cause so that your content is available to a wider audience. That's not necessarily grant, that's more donation volunteering. But if you recently registered, just please start tracking the date in a proper date format that you do everything. Scan your documentation and reach out to a few groups. If your charity, if you're a new charity, you're probably operating on a similar SDG goal, right? So I would find maybe a similar charity or other cause or organization too, and maybe uh, take a look at some of the grants or some recipients that are related to your goal, because you usually are helping. If you tackle it from the SDG level, maybe you don't have to worry about being too niche or being as new. Uh, and if you're not familiar with the sustainable development governance goals, we're talking things like, you know, communities, neighborhoods, preventing hunger, life on land, life in the water, a type of deal. So what's the broad category that your charity is serving? And then if you search for grants specific to that SDG goal, maybe you'll, you know, hit some traction there. Any advice for international nonprofits looking to apply for Canadian grants? That's a good one. Eligibility, I guess. That is the first thing that comes to mind is are you eligible? So uh, try to find examples where that's happened before. I guess the question, if you're looking for, are you doing something in Canada? Like if you're an international nonprofit, are you hosting something in Canada benefiting Canadians? Are you doing, or do you have any presence or any transactions that are happening in Canada? If the answer is yes, then maybe that'll be easier and look at the eligibility criteria. But to get data on successful grant applications other than crowdsourcing. Well, one is getting it your kind of entering it yourself, which is tedious, not great. I'm sure there's a couple other sources out there. Like there might be an aggregator. I'm not aware of one, but I know there's a few different groups that try to help people with grants. They're, you know, either not for profit or private organizations themselves. So when we say the successful applications too, I don't think that's being, I don't think any company is like willingly giving that out either. They'll host on their website, hey, this is what we did for these specific communities, but it'll usually just be for the previous year. I mean, maybe you can, but you know, I don't believe there'd be a lot of luck in approaching and requesting for, you know, an aggregate result and say, hey, can I have the last 5 years of successful applications? It would be nice. Maybe there's a better luck in the public sector, though. Maybe there's some more transparency or better archiving or something. So that's something I'll be interested in following up on. Like, can the city give us, or can the province give us this information? Uh,
Hmm.
But if it comes to private, I mean, we're probably left with other companies, people like ourselves, or like web scraping results.
You mentioned, I think you said a SDG goal earlier.
Yeah, let me just take a look.
That's a term I don't think I've heard.
So sustainable development. Am I still screen
Well,
sharing?
yeah.
Yeah. So broad categories of helping out.
Okay. SDGs. Okay, you know, somewhere maybe I've heard this or something similar, but they're goals for doing good, right?
Yeah, and it's a global effort too. So when for instance, at a couple of my workplaces, yeah, I'll do that right now. A couple of my workplaces, you, in order to, well, not in order, but as part of gathering uh, data on employees' volunteering activities, we're asked to relate this to a goal. So, you know, when doing work with a community association, here we go, that's sustainable cities, right? You know, you do a cleanup activity, we could say life on, you know, life on land for animal support. And
Uh,
when you look at it, if you're a recently registered charity, you know, I could be wrong, but I'm willing to guess that you're focusing on one of these 17 things. And if you are, then that might be a good starting point. Say, where is, you know, where can I find support for programs like Zero Hunger? Like, I think that'd be like, you know, the Leftovers Foundation, the Calgary Food Bank.
hey, thanks. This is something we can add to our list of useful pick lists. Hey, does anybody else have any questions for Mark at this time?
Hi, I'm new to the data for good. Just have a question like about volunteering work. Like, as Mark said, like it would be helpful to create application calendar. So would those kind of work would be available for volunteering purposes?
Um, it's something you could get in touch with us about. We have a website, and if it'll be in the slide pack, or you can just Google Data for Good Calgary. And if you look, or Data for Good Canada, you could start at the national organization, and they have a very simple request form. Or you could go to Calgary and you can register as a volunteer, and there is room also to make suggestions. So if you have suggestions of things that you think would be useful for us to do, then please send them our way. Like we're always, always, we're often usually interested in finding new organizations who could use help with a dashboard or some data cleanup, a project that would be that we could gather some volunteers to help them to make for a good project for the organization and for our volunteers. And what you suggested could be a really good micro project. And these are the volunteer suggested projects that are bounded. So it should take less than a month, or break it up so that you got several month-long modules to accomplish a social goal. And this could be a really interesting goal to see what we can find out, or what kind of information we want to gather, or what kind of sources are available, so that we could provide that information, either use it internally or share it externally. So please keep that in mind when you're thinking, um, when we go for the next call for micro projects next year, that could be a really good suggestion for a micro project as well.
See, thank you. And if I have to choose a particular project, would that be like visible on the website, like for particular non-profit organization, like somebody already suggested the project and work is available?
Yeah, we will, for the micro projects, we do what you should start do your first step, as I like wind my mind back to where you start. On our website, I can share my screen and I can show this to you. So I go to Data for Good Calgary, Data for Good Calgary. And here you got Calgary Data for Good. Once you click on that, we have generic information, some generic forms that we get from the national organization. And we also, under the resources site, have several things of interest. One of which is our personal volunteer expression of interest. This, there's two forms you could fill out. One is a simpler form, and this one gets into a bit more detail. So if you fill out either of those forms, you will get onto our list of people who would like to volunteer. So when we're looking for volunteers for a micro project, we would send a note to everybody saying, here's the micro projects that will take just a month. Here's the kind of skill sets they're looking for. Let us know if you're interested. And then whoever pitches the micro project idea can choose from the applicants to build a team for that 1 month project. And then if they extend it, they might choose a different team or a few new people, depending on what skills they need for the next phase. This is the micro projects input form. If you want to pitch an idea for a micro project, you can pitch this at any time. We will not be acting on it until the new year, but we're happy to collect ideas before then. And this useful resources search is where we've been putting in information about where you can get training, some good online sources for reading or for learning or for helping. I would say just go in here and explore. It's better than me talking about it. And here, if you're an organization who'd like to collaborate with us, this is where you could put your piece of information. So does that help answer your question, or
Yep.
does that just raise more questions?
No, it does. It helps a lot.
Great.
I'm actually excited to check that website.
Okay. That you just made my evening. Does anybody else have any questions for Mark? I would say, Mark, well, I'm going to give people still just a minute because sometimes they just need to articulate it before they write it down. But I want to say that I really appreciate you presenting this and giving us ideas of how we can be more effective in applying for grants and thinking about all the aspects of the grant, like having the information at your fingertips and tracking things so that you have it available and you're not digging for it when you're applying for a grant. And for that matter, just the grant calendar is a really good idea so you don't miss any of those windows. I think everybody on this call has a lot of ideas they can take away that will make them all more effective. So I think that's it for the questions.
Well,
So
thanks again, everybody. I'm looking as great as my first meetup event at YYC, or sorry, Data for Good Calgary chapter. It'll be, hopefully get to meet everybody again in the Januaries or whenever your next meetup is.
oh yeah, do remember January 25th, put it in your calendar. I'm not sure what the event will look like. There's a chance it's going to be an in-person event, which would be a bonus, but we'll have more information coming out in the new year, so please keep an eye on that. And thanks again, everybody, for attending. And especially you, Mark, for giving us something to learn. And have an excellent evening, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Let's see. Okay.